All right. We are live and we're going to be going through the book of Ruth today, mainly because that's where I'm reading right now in the Old Testament. And I thought this would be a good time to do a little bit of a deep dive on the book of Ruth, but I want to just see who's on right now. Give people a couple of minutes to sign in. And then we're going to go through the entire book of Ruth. So we're going to take our time on this one. It's pretty fun book. I think a lot of people are familiar with the book of Ruth because it's easy to read. You can read it in like 15 minutes. So let's see here. Just in time for lunch. Yeah, it's a little early for me. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning. I just had some eggs and toast. Good to go. I have one of my favorite mugs. My brother-in-law with his tribe actually just left. And I don't know if you can see this. This is a mug that my nephews gave me. Best uncle ever. We had some battles with Risk over the weekend. Played a lot of Risk. So I'm a little tired, a little worn out. What else did we do? Talked a lot about the Bible, which is pretty cool. Just had a fun time. My grandson came over, and he's actually starting to walk a little bit further each day. It feels like right now, I think his Guinness Book of World Records is like maybe 10 feet, something like that. And I was showing him how to shoot hoops with a little ball, and he was standing there, and it took him a while because he kept dropping it straight down. I'm like, bro, dude, you got to put an arc in it. And you got to understand he's 11 months old, and he just kept dropping it straight down. And then eventually I let go of him, and then he started doing a little head wobble, and he grabbed the ball, and then he threw it up. And then my nephew, Dylan, was holding his hands like this, and he would put a nice little arch, and drop it in, and everybody was cheering. So it was pretty fun. So yeah, so it was a fun weekend. That's probably why I didn't see too many videos from me. Usually I just do an onslaught of videos over the weekend, a couple times maybe on Friday, a couple times on Saturday, a couple times on Sunday. But I was busy with the fam, dominating the world. All right, so we will jump in to the book of Ruth. We're just going to go through it and take our time. Let's see here. Let's just read some of the comments. So JT is in the house. Scott 7300. That's actually a cool channel name if you're to have your own YouTube channel. That's kind of cool. So yeah, I like Scott because he's always on. Always gives his insight as well to make sure that I'm not going off the beaten path, make sure I'm not going crazy. So it's always cool to have people online that are comfortable with the scriptures, and we can interact and have a fun session as well. So I always appreciate your feedback. And then also, let's see here, was Ruth a queen? And I think he's talking about Esther. Not sure what you mean there. Boaz is a type shadow of Jesus in the function. Yeah, we're going to be talking about that. This is actually pretty cool. Esther, blessing, Black Swan, uncle. Yep. All right. Okay. So let's just jump in. We're going to go to the book of Ruth. And maybe you'll learn something new. Maybe this is old hat for you. I think it might be kind of interesting. So let's see here. Yeah, let's just dive in. So we have the book of Ruth. Now, depending who you talk to, the deeper you go, it's hard to tell who the author is for this particular book. I would lean on the side of quite possibly Samuel could be the author. It's almost like it's kind of the same idea with the book of Hebrews. Like, I lean heavily on the side that it was Paul the Apostle that wrote the book of Hebrews, even though he doesn't sign off on it at the end. But the style, the way it is written, everything in that book smells, tastes, looks like the authorship of Paul. You can pose an argument, maybe it was Barnabas, maybe it was Timothy and all this stuff, but when you read it, especially near the end, where it looks like the person writing it was going to meet some of his followers, and I think one of them was Timothy as well, basically saying, like, when Timothy shows up, give him the floor, if you will. So it's interesting. So whoever the author was in Hebrews was quite familiar with Timothy, and pretty much you could, again, if you were to put it in a scale of percentages, you could say it was highly influenced by Paul the Apostle, just like the Gospel of Luke was influenced by Paul, the Gospel of Mark, and quite possibly the Gospel of Matthew, because those are known as the synoptic Gospels. And there are many scholars that say that they got their information from another source. They're just not sure who that source is. And my theory is they got it from Paul, because Mark was a companion of Paul. I think he was a nephew of Barnabas. And also Luke was a companion of Paul. And we know this from the book of Acts. And he's mentioned also in Paul's letters. So that's why I say Paul most likely had an influence over the Gospels, because the Gospels were written after the Pauline letters. They were written anywhere from 70 to 100 AD. The book of Revelation being written around 100 AD, I believe. And then Paul's letters were all written before 70 AD, anywhere from 35 to 70 AD. More specifically, the letter of Thessalonians would be first, then Galatians, and then it kind of spreads out. And I think Romans would be one of the last letters written by Paul. Kind of interesting, because when we read it, we think it's all in a timeline, like what do you call it? When we read the Bible, let me just see if I can come back to me for a second before we jump into Ruth here. We think it's in chronological historical order, but if you think about it, the Jewish Bible ends with 2nd Chronicles. Our Bible ends with Malachi, the Old Testament. And we have the Gospels first, obviously, to explain a little bit more, to showcase the life of Jesus for 3.5 years. And then we have the book of Acts, which is basically the birth of our church. And then you have the letters of Paul, and then obviously the letters of some of the other apostles as well. And then you finish off with the book of Revelation. But that doesn't mean that is it necessarily in the order that they were written. It's in the order that was decided. I'm trying to think where that was. I just totally drawn a blank, but basically a bunch of people got together and said, this is the order that we're going to have the Old Testament, and this is the order that we're going to have the New Testament. So there you go. So now we're diving into the book of Romans. And if you think I'm mistaken along the way, even with the order of books and all that, let me know that in the comments as well. I just can't remember the name. Constantinople comes to mind, but I just can't remember the name of when they actually got together to organize the Bible. So when we're talking about the timeline of the book of Ruth, again, we're not 100% sure who the authorship is, but you can lean heavily towards Samuel, because Samuel was the last judge. And you can if you were to insert the book of Ruth, you would say it would have to be somewhere after Ehud, who helped defeat the Moabites. Remember the king that he took out? He created a dagger, a double-edged dagger, kept it in his left side. And then when he showed up to the king, I think the king was thinking that there was some kind of sexual favor going on here because they were very perverted in nature. And he had a parlor. And so Ehud showed up and said, I have a gift for you. And the king said, get everybody out of here, and stood up before Ehud. And Ehud stuck the dagger into his belly so much that the belly actually closed over top of the dagger and killed him. And Ehud left, locked the doors, and took off, fled. And when people showed up, they're like, he's probably, I know this is going to sound a little weird, but he's probably playing with himself, masturbating, or he's doing something with someone else, because that was what this guy was like. So that's, again, depending who you read and all this kind of stuff, you have to kind of read behind the lines whenever you see something like they were sporting or they were making sport of someone. It usually has sexual connotations behind it, grinding, all this kind of stuff. When Samson was put into a prison, you can almost say that it was because of his strength and everything that they put him in prison, and they raped him, pillaged him. Maybe they wanted to use his seed to help populate a stronger race. Who knows? Or they just wanted to physically, sexually abuse Samson, and they ended up bringing him out butt naked in front of all the Philistine leaders, again, to make sport of him, most likely to sexualize Samson in front of everyone. So that's why Samson, like, basically, Lord, grant me revenge because they plucked out my eyes. And so there's, even in Job, there's connotations that whenever the name sport, it's not just making fun, teasing someone, but there's often sexual connotations behind that. So when Ehud showed up, I think this king thought that there was something going on, maybe a little bit on the sexual side of things, and Ehud stabbed him to death. And when they came, they said, it looks like our king is covering himself, which is another play off the words that there's something perhaps sexual or intimate going on whenever you see covering. Take that with a grain of salt. So that, and then they left him alone until they were embarrassed because they didn't want to go in there in case he was busy. So finally, they're like, okay, too much time has passed for this guy. So they unlock the door and realize he's dead. And by then, Ehud escaped. So now you got a little bit of a snapshot of that. So that would be the timeline between Ehud and Samson of when the book of Ruth was taking place. Because again, Ehud basically conquered the Moabites. So there would have been a time of peace. And he was a judge for 18 years, meaning that would be a good time for any deserted Israelites that were in the land or captured in the land of Moab or whatever, could now return safely to Israel because now they're back in power. So, all right. I know that's a lot of stuff, right? But just to give you context of when this book was, you could say it was after the Bronze Age collapse, because we all know what caused the Bronze Age collapse, even though historians might go, this is a mystery. Egypt was at its peak around the 13th century, 14th, 15th century, all the way to the 12th century, and then all of a sudden collapsed. Why? Well, it was because of Exodus. It was because Israel was actually, because of all the plagues that were upon Egypt, it collapsed their economy, and then Israel was able to spoil Egypt around the 12th century. And if you look at a timeline historically, that's when the Bronze Age collapsed, and then the Iron Age was introduced, and Israel had no idea how to fight wars in Canaan because they were unfamiliar with this type of weaponry, which would be the beginning of the Iron Age. So that's kind of interesting as well, because there were periods of time in the book of Judges where you would see Israel had no weapon. They had no sword. They had nothing. They basically just had plows and shears. That was kind of their weapons, even right up until the time of Saul, because it was actually illegal for the Israelites to own weapons. The Philistines would come and attack them if they ever had someone making a sword. It was illegal. So that's kind of the time frame. Israel was afraid of some of these Philistines that had iron chariots, not bronze chariots, not wooden chariots, but iron chariots, which were a little bit stronger than the bronze chariots, which is what Egypt had. So there was basically a lot of territory was up for grabs, because Egypt was in the process of, they collapsed, so they're in the process of rebuilding. They lost a lot of their resources. A lot of their slaves were gone. Like, if you think about it, they lost like 1 million slaves. And when Israel was fleeing, God didn't want them to go through the way of the kings in the north, because if they saw all the armies approaching from Canaan with the iron chariots, they would probably lose heart and go back to Egypt. So instead, Israel went down south, grabbed the miners that were slaves in the gold mine, and basically grabbed them, and then swung back up to head out. And that's when the Egyptians showed up, and they're like, oh, great, we are trapped. There's no way out. And Moses started crying out to God, saying, like, basically, we're done. And God's like, why are you crying to me? Put your hand up, like, hold the rod out, part the sea. And then we know the rest. Israel was actually able to escape through the sea. But I think that was one of the big reasons why they got trapped, is they had to free the miners that were in prison, and they wouldn't have known that Israel was free until they came down there and captured it, because it was a huge mine. And if you are in charge, if you have all the gold and weapons and everything from Egypt, and you're heading south, don't think they had swords yet. The Egyptians there probably would have fled the camp and left the miners, because they would have realized what was happening to their economies, because they weren't getting paid anymore. So they probably left all the miners. So when Israel showed up, they could actually free the miners and head out with all of Israel. Anyways, all right. Somebody's having a weak Wi-Fi connection. Hopefully when I upload this would be a little bit more stable. So yeah, again, if there's something that I'm saying too that seems like it's a little cray, let me know that in the comments, because I don't have a script or anything. This is just lodged somewhere. I think it's right here somewhere in my head. So now you get a little bit of the backdrop of where Ruth was in context of time. So let's go to Ruth chapter 1. And I know that took a while. It's like 15 minutes of backstory. All right, so let's jump into this. Dun, 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 dun. Let me make sure this shows up. There we go. So yeah. Now it came to pass in the days when judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. And certain men of Bethlehem, Judah. So the reason why they called this Bethlehem, Judah, is because Bethlehem was in the region of Judah. So Judah was a piece of land allocated to the tribe of Judah. So oftentimes they would combine them together. So, like I live in Cochrane, Alberta. This would be the same thing. This is Bethlehem, Judah. Went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. So it's interesting that they fled to Moab, which is, if you think about the brotherly covenant, there was a covenant made between Israel, Ammon, Moab, and the Edomites, because they were all related in some way. So they felt comfortable after the defeat of Moab to go back into that land and hang out until the famine was over in Israel. And the name of the man was Amalek, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his two sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephraimites of the Bethlehem, Judah. So that's where they lived, in that area. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Amalek, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her two sons, and they took them wives of the women of Moab. So if you want to follow the lineage of the women of Israel, it's mixed. It's quite a bit mixed. Like if you think about Manasseh and Ephraim now basically being the firstborn of Israel, his parents, their mother was of Egyptian descent. Joseph, obviously, from his father Jacob. So Manasseh and Ephraim are basically half Israel, half Egyptian. And now we have a woman that we'll get introduced to right away from, she's from Moab, which is Ruth, which ends up being a great-great-grandparent, I believe, great-great-great-grandparent of King David. And we'll see that at the end. So, but it's interesting that David's lineage goes back to Moab as well. Crazy, right? All right. So, and they took them wives. Okay, so Amalek, Naomi's son, died, and she was left and her two sons, and they took them wives of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, not Oprah, Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they dwelled there about 10 years. Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left of her two sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people, giving them bread. I'm just going to make this full screen so you guys can see this here. Wherefore she went forth out of the place she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on their way to return unto the land of Judah, because that's where Amalek came from. And Naomi said unto her two daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead. What dead? This is plural. This is a plural term. The dead. As in both the sons, Mahlon and Chilion. So that's the dead that were represented here. The dead, these two people. So you dealt kindly with the dead, meaning my sons, and with me by sticking with me. So thank you for that. Go home. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. Obviously, they loved Naomi. They said unto her, Surely we will return unto thee, unto thy people. Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters. Why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I'm too old to have an husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have an husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry till they were grown? So basically saying, like, even, let's just say, even tonight, I found a husband, I got married, conceived, had a son. Would you wait 18 years approximately to have a husband? No, it's silly. Would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Meaning, would you abstain from having a husband and wait for these boys to grow old? No, it's silly. My daughters, for it giveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And this is a saying, when grief would happen, they would always attribute it to the Lord, saying, the Lord is not with me. He's not for me anymore, because look, I don't have any children, which isn't true. but it's also an expression of mourning, of anger, of hurt, of loss, all this kind of stuff. This is what people would do. And we find this even today. People say things like this. They lose their job. Oh, God is against me. But depending how you do it, some people just attribute to everything to God, and other people attribute it saying God is after them. So there's a way of doing it properly. And they lifted up their voice and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. So Orpah left, and she said, Behold, thy sister-in-law has gone back up to her people and unto her gods. So telling us that this was the loyalty that they had. Not only Orpah, but also Ruth had a loyalty to other gods. Thy sister-in-law has gone back unto her people, unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, like don't make me to leave, or to return from following after thee. Whither thou goest, I will go, and whether thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. So I'm going to switch loyalties now from falling away to other gods to your God. I'm going to worship your God now, and your people will be my people, even though she's a stranger. Where thou diest, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee. So now Ruth made a vow, and this vow stands because she doesn't have a husband to disannul her vow. Because back then, if a woman makes a crazy vow, a husband can say, no, like I still need you to be here at home, helping out the farm, whatever it is. So I disannul it. And same thing if the daughter was living under her father's roof and she makes a crazy vow, the father can disavow it. If that makes sense. To basically say, no, it doesn't stand. But because Ruth doesn't have a husband anymore, she's able to make a vow and nobody will say anything against it. So she's now made a vow saying, I am not leaving your side. So then verse 18, when she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. So they too went on till they came to Bethlehem, which is interesting because that's where Rachel died. And it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that all the city was moved about them, and they said, Is this Naomi? And she said unto them, Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dwelt very bitterly with me. And it's interesting in the book of Revelation that this word Almighty is used by John to talk about Jesus Christ. So when Jesus is mentioned in Revelation, he has the same authority as God the Father. You have God the Son, God the Father, God the Holy Spirit. All right, verse 21. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? And notice people didn't call her Mara. They still called her Naomi. But she was in mourning because she lost her husband and she lost her two sons. So you have to give Naomi a bit of a break here. We're too hard on people sometimes. We're like, oh, how can you ever mourn? Get over it. Well, she didn't get over it here. She's like, look, the Lord took everything away from me. Like he's dealt harshly with me, dealt very bitterly. So she's mourning her loss right now of her husband and her two sons. So I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why call ye me Naomi? Because they still called her that, seeing that the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, lest they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. And this is where it gets interesting. So let me just come back to the comments and see how everyone's doing. You're still with me so far? Still with me? I know that was a lot, but let's see. Interesting, right? Yeah, the dead for a resurrection reference. Yeah, so it's interesting when you talk about the dead, you have to look at it as it's not only just one person, the dead, but it could also be a blanket statement for people in that state, the dead. This goes back to Leviticus, where if an ox were to fall in the pit and die, the owner of the pit would now be the owner of the dead. What is the dead in this case? It's the ox that fell into the pit and died. So the person that owns the pit and his responsibility was to cover the pit, didn't cover it, so the ox died. That is now his, or they would split it, cut it in half or whatever, and he would have to restore an ox to the person that lost the ox. So he would have to give him an ox, and he's like, I'll take the dead ox. The dead is in reference to that particular ox. Sometimes they don't put the object afterwards, and they would just say the dead, but in conversation you would know what the person's talking about. He's talking about the ox that just died. That's his now for food. And he took his good ox and gave it to his neighbor, saying, sorry about that, my bad. I should have covered the pit and I didn't do it. So now it's all restored. Now if somebody had stole an ox, he had to give the person that he stole from 5 oxes. That was to punish the thief from stealing and all this kind of stuff. Anyways, so that's the idea behind the dead. So whenever there's a reference, you have to understand in the context of what was being presented. Is it, if you talk about the New Testament, is the dead in reference to what Jesus Christ did? Or is it in reference to multiple people that are in a state of deadness, if you will? Remember when Jesus said, let the dead bury the dead? That's almost like these are people that are in that state. They're not living, as in they're not spiritual. They're not spiritually living, meaning they don't know Jesus Christ as their Messiah. So he's like, let the dead bury the dead. It's almost like slang, if you will. So then sometimes in context, the dead in Christ shall rise first. That is a state of people that had died in Christ, but they are the first fruits of Christ. So now you can use a blanket statement saying that all people that die in Christ are the dead, but now they're resurrected. Why? They're promoted to eternal life because they ditched this body. This body basically turns back into serpent food. All right. So let's go into chapter 2. Where are we at? We're only at 33 minutes. Amazing. Let's go to chapter 2. Chapter 2. This is such a fun book. This is where it gets really interesting now. And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth, of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. So now we get introduced to Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said unto Naomi, let me now go. So you have to read this from the perspective of, you almost have to ignore this part from the perspective of Naomi's view. And Ruth hasn't met Boaz yet. But the author of this book is giving us a hint saying, look, Naomi had a kinsman. This is a bit of backstory of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth, the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. That's the background. This guy is stinking rich, wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. Now we go into the story. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said unto Naomi, let me now go into the field and glean ears of corn after him, whose sight I shall find grace. Again, she doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know anything about Boaz, and neither does Naomi at this moment. And she said unto her, go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging to Boaz. So now we get a little bit of happenstance. What does that mean? It means by coincidence, she came upon the land that belonged to Boaz. It wasn't done on purpose because, again, they didn't know where they were in relation to the land, especially not Ruth. So she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said unto the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered him, the Lord bless thee. Notice reapers. It's kind of interesting, right? Then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over the reapers. So he had a servant, someone that was in charge of the reapers. Whose damsel is this? This is an inkling that it's like, wow, this is a smoking hot chick. Wowzers. Basically, when he was doing it in this context, it's like, this is interesting. It's not like, hey, who's this woman in my field? No, you got to read it from the context of who is this sexy young lady? Because I am a single man. And the servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, it is the Moabitish damsel that came back into Naomi out of the country of Moab. So it is not forbidden for the Israelites to marry someone from another country. That is important to note because up until this time, the Israelites were marrying Canaanite women, and they were allowing their sons to marry Canaanite women, and they were allowing their Israelite women to marry Canaanites. That's very important. Very important. So this is not something that's illegal because she is a stranger from another land coming in to where Israel was. And the rule was, according to the law of Moses, was to treat strangers with kindness because you were dealt harshly as a stranger in Egypt, and you're not to treat strangers harshly. So it was not a big deal for Boaz to look onto this woman and go, wow, this is a good catch. All right. So moving forward, servant was set over the reaper, said it's a Moabitish. Like if you look at it some other way and you go, no, he was disgusted because she's a Moabite, you're missing the whole story of Ruth, that they fell in love with each other. You're missing, this is a love story. That's why the context, whose damsel is this? Verse 6. So verse 7, and she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came, and she continued even from morning until now. Why? This is kind of fun. Hope you guys are getting something out of this. So basically, the rule in the book of Leviticus and in Deuteronomy, the idea was, if there's a stranger in the land, like, don't cut the corners. Don't cut corners. Like, don't go to the edge of your field and reap that edge. Leave some for strangers. That was the idea, so that you can still be able to feed the poor that are entering into your land, strangers that are from a distant country. They come into the land, they can eat. This is why Jesus was not doing anything technically illegal when he was with his disciples, and the Pharisees approached him and said, why are your disciples eating corn on the Sabbath? Well, technically they weren't working on the Sabbath, but what they were doing is they were grabbing the leftovers, and it was not illegal to actually grab a handful and eat it. What was illegal is if you started putting them into buckets and then taking them home and cooking and all this kind of stuff. You couldn't do that on the Sabbath. So they were trying to trap Jesus, and yet it was not illegal what he was doing, because that was not a big deal. Strangers could do it. Strangers can come in, just grab a handful, and then keep passing by. It was when you had to start reaping and cutting things down and all this stuff. That's what was actually illegal. So this goes all the way back to Leviticus, which is a fantastic book of the Bible. I love Leviticus, especially when you can see it tying into other books of the Bible as well. So that's why Boaz basically says to these young men, eventually, like we'll get to this, but basically says, you know what? While you're at it, why don't you leave some extra handfuls? So as you're reaping the wheat and everything, just leave extra handfuls. Just start dishing it out. So when she comes by with the maidens that are also working, that you would actually give her a little bit extra sugar, if you will. So she doesn't have to work so hard, because the day before she was working from morning till evening, and Boaz wanted to give her a little bit of a break and give her a little bit extra from the reapers, make it a little bit easier for her. But Ruth didn't stop working, so she ended up with more than enough at the end of the night, because she was a hard worker and she had access now. She had enough for her, and she had enough for Ruth or Naomi, which is kind of interesting, right? Shows her that she had plenty. She was taken care of, if you will, in abundance. So if you tie that into Christianity, we shouldn't have to worry. Jesus mentioned it. He says, look at the birds. They're not even worried about food, and yet your heavenly Father takes care of them. So why are you worried about clothes, what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat? This is the heathen do this kind of stuff. God knows what you need. So let tomorrow take care of itself, basically. Today has enough issues, so don't worry about tomorrow. So this goes all the way back to Ruth now, being a stranger in the land. And the first day she's working from morning to evening and barely has enough for Naomi, let alone herself. Now she can take as much as she wants for herself and give it to Naomi, whatever, like that helps out Naomi as well. So it's kind of interesting here. And we're going to read that. Don't want to skip too far ahead. All right, so let's continue on. Over the reapers, whose damsel continued in mourning and tarried a little in the house. So she's basically working really hard. She hardly took a break. Then Boaz said unto Ruth, hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field. Stay here. Don't go anywhere else. Neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, where my reapers are, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? It's almost like a rhetorical question, basically saying, look, I'm taking care of you. The young men aren't going to touch you. They're not going to lay a finger. They're not going to bother you and say, hey, what are you doing later tonight? What are you doing at sundown? You got any plans for the Sabbath? That kind of thing. That's basically the connotation that Boaz is saying to Ruth. Don't worry about the young men. They're not going to go after you. They're not going to ask you to marry them, whatever it is. Just, I'll take care of you. When it comes to food, I'll take care of you. So almost like he's claiming her in some ways from an employment status, saying, look, you're not going to be harassed, whatever. Just, there you go. And when thou art athirst, go unto the vessels. You don't even have to work for that, because the young men would have drawn the water for themselves in the heat of the day. You can drink out of the vessels that the young men have. So you get everything. You get food. You're taken care of. You don't have to look in another field. You don't have to look for another field. You don't have to worry about men in another field, because you could get harmed, and depending what field you go into, because men are men. Let's just face it. Let's just be honest with ourselves. Some men are pigs. Some men are disgusting. Some men have good intentions. Some men don't. Perhaps most men don't have good intentions when they're young. So he's like, don't worry about this stuff. Stay in my field because my men will listen to me, and you could stay with the maidens. So you're under protection, and you don't even have to think about water because the day before, when you were working, she hardly took any time to drink water. She only took a quick break, probably because she didn't get any water from the men. That's why she took a quick break. It's like, well, I got to keep going. I got to finish. So now Boaz noticed that and said, when you get thirsty, just go to the men. Drink out of their vessels. It's fine. They're not going to touch you. You can have access. You can work as long as you want, whatever you want. You're cool. Then she fell on her face and bowed herself to the ground and said unto him, why have I found grace in thine eyes that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger? And Boaz answered and said unto her, it hath fully been showed me. So he was asking details about her. So it's been fully shown me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law. So now he's connecting the dots since the death of thine husband. And now, even though she's free from that law. She does not have to, she's not obligated to help her mother-in-law out. Nothing. She is free to marry another, and she's not doing it. She's staying with her mother-in-law, even if it means not having children in the future, which was a big deal to women. And how thou hast left thy father, your own family, and thy mother, and the land of thy nativity, which is Moab, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore. Meaning, she had no idea what she was getting herself into. She didn't know anything. All she knew was Naomi. The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. So now, basically, Boaz is giving her a blessing, saying, may the Lord compensate thy work. What was her work? Her work was taking care of Naomi. And so Boaz is saying, may the Lord reward you for this, give you a full reward because of what you're doing right now. Under whose wings thou art come to trust. So you come to trust the God of Israel. And I'm going to show you what the difference is between my God and your gods. This is how we treat people here in Israel. Then she said, let me find favor in thy sight, my Lord, for thou hast comforted me, and for thou hast spoken friendly unto thine handmaid, though I be not like unto one of thine handmaidens. Again, in reference to the strangers. Boaz said unto her at mealtime, come thou hither, and eat of the bread, and dip thy morsel in the vinegar. Interesting. Jesus also talks about this as well. This was like a tradition to dip the morsel in vinegar and then pass it to other people, and you eat together. This is having sup together. And she sat beside the reapers, and she reached her parched corn, and she did eat and was sufficed and left. She ate with the reapers. Interesting, right? Doesn't look like she's eating with the maidens. She's separated from the maidens, and she's eating with the reapers. And believe me, because the reapers worked hard, not to say the handmaidens didn't work hard, but they also had water, they had parched corn, they had everything at their disposal to eat, and she was taken care of. And when she did rise up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves. So don't just leave her on the edges, because that's harder work, even though they were to not go to the edges. He's basically saying to his young man, don't let her stay out in the edges. Let her glean among you and reproach her not. Like, don't look down at her for being amongst you. Don't be disgusted. Don't flirt with her. Don't do anything. Just treat her like yourself, basically. You're working hard. She's working hard. Let her be amongst you. Let her be amongst the reapers. And as a bonus, let fall also some of the handfuls on purpose. That's what of purpose. On purpose for her and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. So if you drop some extra accidentally, don't be a cheapskate. So if you drop some and you're like, oh, shoot, this fell out of my bag of wheat or whatever, don't bend down and reach to pick it up. Just leave it. Let her get it. It's fine. And then sprinkle a little bit more as you're going, like just handfuls, and don't rebuke her for picking it up. Just leave her alone. It's interesting, right? Yeah, sexy. I know, it's funny, right? I don't speak Greek or Hebrew, but I could read between the lines. I'm not naive. Let's see. Let's go back. So far, these scriptures show how men and women have forgotten their purpose. Yep. The damsel was the word that caught me as sexy. Yeah, it's interesting, right? All right. Continuing on. Let's see here. Any comments? Anything? Doesn't look like it. Okay, let's go back. Where are we here? Suffice, risen up. Okay, reproach her not, rebuke her not. So she gleaned in the field. So she still worked hard. She never let up. She's almost like a workaholic. So she gleaned in the field unto even, and beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. So you can almost look at that as one full day's wage, basically, even though these weren't wages. But I'm trying to say that if you worked as hard as you could and the guys were leaving her a little bit of extra, that equaled to an ephah of barley, which is equivalent to 1 day. So remember that for later. And she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth and gave it to her that she had reserved after she was sufficed. Meaning, after she had enough for herself, she gave the rest to Naomi, meaning she had plenty, probably had twice as much. And her mother-in-law said unto her, where hast thou gleaned today? She's shocked, because the day before she worked from morning to night and barely had enough for both of them, barely. And most likely Ruth would have given her most of it, because that seems like that's the kind of person that Ruth was. So Naomi paid attention to this, that, man, it's still tough times, even though we're in the right field, but Ruth had to work hard from sun up to sun down in order to take care of two mouths. And she shewed her mother-in-law whom she had wrought, and said, the man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. Ding, ding, ding. Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left his kindness to the living and to the dead. Oh, there's that, to the dead. What dead are we talking about, ladies and gentlemen? Naomi's sons, both of them, and her husband. So this reference is to three people. Kindness to the living. Who's the living? Naomi, because she remains alive, and so does Ruth. And God is showing kindness to the dead. Who are the dead? It's Amalek, Chilion, and Malon. Those three. And Naomi said unto her, the man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen, next in line to help us redeem our lineage, because it's going to be lost, because I have no children. This is in the context that Naomi is talking to Ruth. This guy's next in line. He is next. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said, he said unto me also, oh, by the way, he also said this, thou shalt keep fast by my young men, as in reaping with them, until they have ended all my harvest, until I am done harvesting, till they have ended all my harvest. So basically, you can work until my harvest is done. That's what she's saying. So employment until harvest season is over. You're reaping among the men. Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field. What does that mean? She's saying, look, it is good that you are with thee and you're not in another field. Why? Because the maidens could get into trouble in another person's field, but not in Boaz's field from the men. So this is why, because again, he said, thou shalt keep fast by my young men. And Naomi's saying this is good because you can be with his maidens and that they meet not in any other field, talking about the young men. You don't have to deal with this stuff. You don't have to worry about your life. You can relax along with his maidens because they're relaxed. They're not being harassed either. So she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz to glean unto the end of barley harvest and of wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law. So that tells you that Boaz took care of the maidens as well, as in they were allowed to reap with the reapers. Interesting, right? He took care of his people. Okay, chapter 3. And Naomi, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? So this is Naomi saying, look, I'm going to figure this out. And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight to the threshing floor. He's going to make beer tonight. He's going to get wasted tonight. I know some people will be like, what? I can't believe that's in the Bible. What? You're adding to this. Well, what do you think they were doing? They were making beer right here. Winnoweth barley tonight on the threshing floor. No, that's impossible. Nobody's ever drank beer in the Bible. Okay, well, watch. Wash thyself, clean yourself up, make yourself presentable, make yourself sexy. Therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment, put some ointment, put some perfume on, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor, but make not that. So if you don't think Moabites know how to make themselves sexy, you got another thing coming. You're crazy, because they do. Why do you think made Israel fell when they were in the wilderness? Remember that time in the wilderness when Balaam had Balak, or Balak had Balaam make a curse and all this kind of stuff going on? Well, that was from this area. That was from the Moabites. These women knew how to seduce men. Not saying this is what Ruth was doing directly. Bear with me. Stick with me here. Don't run off. If you come from a culture where you know how to dress up and your culture is very sexy in nature, where they know how to seduce men, and you come out of that and yet you're considered righteous out of all those women, because she could have had any man. She could have dressed up sexy and had any of the reapers, any of them. She could have looked at this guy and said, I'm making him my husband. But she didn't do that. So instead, she made herself sexy for Boaz. She got a new garment on. She didn't use her work clothes. She put a little perfume on, made herself attractive to Boaz. Oh, let's see here. Threshing floor, wash thyself, anoint thee, put thy raiment, get thee down, but make not thyself known unto the man. So do it when he is done eating and drinking. Do it after he passes out. Again, I didn't write this book. I'm just reading it to you. Until he shall have done eating and drinking. Remember, this kind of happened before. If you're thinking about culture, Moab's father was Lot, and this happened with his daughters where they got him drunk and then they slept with him. when he drunk, and then that's how we get Ammon, and that's how we get um, Moab, the Moabites and the Ammonites. So again, I'm not saying this is to encourage people to do this. I'm just saying historically this is what has happened within the culture of the Moabites and the culture of the Ammonites. So this would not be foreign to Ruth to wait till a person is drunk and then go lie down beside them. That's all I'm saying here. This is what Naomi is telling Ruth to do. So, and it shall be when he lieth down that thou shalt make the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet. Again, a little bit of sexual connotation there. I'm not saying they slept with each other, but she uncovered his feet. And there is, you can look at it in other verses where this is almost a sexual connotation and intimacy, intimate. She probably snuggled right into his arms, and he was asleep. And lay thee down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do. So when he wakes up, he's going to have a woman in his arms or at his feet or beside him or whatever. And she said unto her, all that thou sayest unto me will I do, I will do. And she went down onto the floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz had eaten and was drunk, and his heart was merry, he's intoxicated, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn to be by himself. And she came softly, almost secretly, and uncovered his feet and lay her down. And it came to pass at midnight that the man was afraid and turned himself, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. Interesting, right? Okay, so now, and he said, who art thou? And she answered, I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Spread over, therefore, thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. So if that isn't sexual in nature, I don't know what else is. And I don't know if you saw that. I don't know if I showed that to you. Let me show it to you. Wash thyself, wash therefore, anoint thee, put thy raiment on thee. So verse 3. Hopefully you guys can see this. And it shall be when he lieth down that shall mark the place where he shall lie. I missed that. I missed that. That's interesting, right? So wash thyself, therefore, anoint thee, put thy raiment on thee, get thee down to the floor, but make not thyself known unto the man until he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be when he lieth down. So whenever he takes a nap, mark the place where he shall lie. Make a mental note of where he sleeps, where he likes to sleep. And thou shalt go in and uncover his feet and lay thee down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do. And she saith unto her, all that thou shalt sayest unto me will I do. And she went unto the floor, did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn. So she knew where he was going to lie down, and she came softly and uncovered his feet. Who knows if she was lying there somewhere within the corn hiding, because she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay her down. So she laid down. And it came to pass at midnight that when the man was afraid and turned himself, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. This tells me that this guy was a righteous guy. Why? It's interesting because when my wife and I first got married, she was my only one, I used to have nightmares and dreams, wild dreams, of me pulling a dog sled, or a dog sled being pulled by dogs, and I'm going through snow. I never had a good sleep. Why? Because I was sleeping with a woman that I had never slept with before. So I would not have a good sleep, because now you have somebody sleeping with you, and you have to get used to that idea. So if you're not used to sleeping with someone and you sleep with them, and you wake up in the middle of the night startled, you just realize that there's somebody in bed with you. It takes you a little bit to get used to that, especially when you're newly married. That's what was happening to me. So in this case, Boaz was probably having a dream because he was drinking and who knows. And in the middle of the night at midnight, all of a sudden he's like half out of it. And there's somebody next to him. Startled him. That tells me he is not, again, this is just me saying this, I don't think he's ever slept with anyone. I'm building a case that I think this guy had never done this before because he was startled in his sleep, as in he's not used to somebody sleeping with him. Just interesting, right? Interesting. Because once you do get used to the person and you start snuggling with them and all that, you have great sleep, a good sleep. But Boaz didn't have a good sleep. Why? Because a stranger was next to him in bed. And she's like, cover me. You're the next kinsman redeemer. I want you to be my husband, basically. I want you to allow me to have a child through you. That's basically what she's saying. So there's sexual connotations all over here. And it's not bad. This is not wrong. This is two human beings. Like sometimes we get a little bit religious, if you will, and we forget the bigger picture. All right, so let's continue onward. All right, who art thou? She said, I'm Ruth. So he didn't even know who she was. And he said, blessed be thou, the Lord. Hang on. I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. So I want to have a baby with you. And he said, blessed be thou. Remember, she's not a Christian. She's not a godly woman, as in she does not worship Jehovah God yet. Can we just be fair with that statement? That Boaz is with a woman that is not a Christian, one. She's not a Jew, two. She's not an Israelite, three. She doesn't belong in that land. She's as strange as they come. Can we stop being religious when we're reading the book of Ruth just for a minute? Okay? Just for a minute. Said, who art thou? And he said, blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning. So you're helping out Naomi, but now you're even doing something even better. Inasmuch as thou followest not young men. That's what he was saying to her. Like, you could have went after these young men, whether they were poor or rich. You could have done it easily. You could have had your pick of the litter. And now, my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest, for all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. All right? You're doing the right thing for people that aren't even yours. That's a virtuous woman. She was putting herself on the line to help Naomi out. And now it is true that I am a near kinsman, howbeit there is a kinsman nearer than I. So Boaz knew that she liked him, wanted him to be a father, wanted him to give her a child through intimacy. But he's saying, look, to do this the right way, there's actually someone that is more near than I am. So that tells you they didn't sleep with each other yet. They didn't sleep with each other yet. But the intention was clear. Ruth wanted him, because to her limited knowledge, Boaz was the closest redeemer based on Naomi's information. But Boaz is like, I know that, that there is someone nearer than I. So tarry this night, stay here, and it shall be in the morning that if he will perform unto thee the part of the kinsman, well, as in, so be it. I'll be disappointed, but it's the right thing. Let him do the kinsman's part. But if he will not do the part of the kinsman to thee, then I will do the part of the kinsman to thee, as the Lord liveth, lie down until the morning. So he swore an oath, saying, look, if this guy wants to be the kinsman redeemer, so be it. Fine. I can live with that. If not, I will do it. I promise you, I will be your husband. I will take care of you. That's his vow. Almost like the first engagement, if you will. And she lay at his feet till morning, and she rose up before one could know another. So she woke up before daylight. And he said, let it not be known that a woman came unto the floor, most likely to the men, because maybe somebody was awake and heard. And he's like, let it not be known that a woman came to the floor. As in, if any of you mention this, you're in trouble. Probably going to get fired. Also, he said, bring the veil that thou hast upon thee and hold it. Another reason why perhaps he didn't recognize her as well, or the other people, because she had a veil. Almost like a bride, if you will. It's interesting, right, that she shows up with a veil over her. She was ready for a wedding. I don't know how else to look at this. She's all dressed up, ready to go, and she's like, here, you be my husband, basically. And when she held it, so she held her veil, he measured 6 measures of a barley. Remember, 1 measure of a barley was enough to last for a day for her and Ruth. Now he's given her 6 measures, meaning, to me, 6 days worth of work. So she doesn't have to work for a week now. She can relax. And he laid it on her, and she went into the city. How do we know this? Well, look here. When she came into her mother-in-law, she said, who art thou, my daughter? Like excitement. Like, who is this woman? It's just it's a cliche. It's a way of excitement that she came in with so much food. And she told her all that the man had done unto her. And she said, these 6 measures of barley. Oh, this is interesting. This is barley now. Not wheat, barley. That's interesting. For he said unto me, go not empty unto thy mother-in-law. Then she said, sit still, my daughter, unto thou know. I got to sneeze. All right. And she said, 6 measures of barley gave me, for she said, go not empty until thy mother-in-law. Then said she, sit still, my daughter, until thou know how the matter will fall. For the man will not be in rest until he have finished the thing this day. So this is another foreshadowing, if you will, of the church. We don't have to do anything in heaven. When we get to heaven, we will be in rest until Jacob's trouble is over, till the marriage supper of the Lamb, which is after Jacob's trouble, after Armageddon. Look at this. Then she said, sit still, my daughter, until thou knowest how the matter will fall, for the man will not be in rest until he have finished the thing this day. All right, last chapter. Then went Boaz up to the gate. Hopefully you're getting something out of this, and we'll talk about this. Up to the gate, and sat him down there. And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, and unto whom he said, ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit ye down here. So they all sat down. And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that has come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's, from the tribe of Judah. And I thought to advertise, so this is basically where we get advertisement from. I thought I'd let you know this, that there is land for sale. Buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me that I may know. For there is none to redeem it beside thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it, because he thought he was just talking about land. Then said Boaz, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. Lots going on here. So basically, if you buy one, you buy all. You buy everything. If you buy the land of the field of Naomi, you also bought Ruth to be your wife, who was the wife of the dead, someone that had died. It's interesting that Boaz mentions this to say that, hey, she was a wife of someone, obviously one of Elimelech's sons, the wife of the dead, the two people. Well, in this case, I'm not sure if it's Chilion or Mahlon, but she was a wife of the dead, one of the sons. To raise up the name of the dead, so there's that raise up again, the name of the dead upon his inheritance, as in the lineage would not die out. Because at this point, the guy was like, yeah, I'll buy it, no problem. And the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar my own inheritance. So maybe this was an older gentleman. Maybe he thought, you know what, there's a chance that I might not be able to have children for myself. Don't know. But he said, redeem thou my right to thyself. So you can have my right of kinsman redeemer, for I cannot redeem it. Now, this was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing. For to confirming all things, a man plucked off a shoe and gave it to his neighbor. And this was a testimony in Israel, almost like a receipt. You wear the other person's shoe. If the shoe fits, wear it. Therefore, the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. And Boaz said unto the elders, unto all the people, ye are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, okay, so she's the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren and from the gate of his place. Ye are witnesses this day. And all the people that were in the gate, and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that is to come into thine house like Rachel and Leah. Isn't that interesting? Which two did build the house of Israel, and thou worthily in Ephratah, and be famous in Bethlehem. And let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah of the seed. So what Tamar did was a righteous, virtuous act to preserve Judah's children, even though she was supposed to have one of his sons, and she ended up not having a son. So instead, she formed a scheme to pretend that she was a harlot in order to sleep with Tamar or sleep with Judah so that she can have Pharez of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife, and when he went in unto her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. And the woman said unto Naomi, blessed be the Lord, which has not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name be famous in Israel. Interesting, right? And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age, for thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, has borne him. Naomi took the child and laid it into her bosom, and became a nurse unto it. And the women in her neighbors, like in her neighborhood, if you will, gave it a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name. So it's interesting that her neighbors gave his name, which is Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Pharez. Pharez begat Hezron. Hezron begat Ram. Ram begat Amminadab, and Amminadab begat Nahshon. Nahshon begat Salmon. You might know who Salmon is. Salmon is the dude that married Rahab. Remember Jericho when she saved 2 of the spies, and she said, hide here on the rooftop and then go flee to the mountain for 3 days until they quit looking for you? That's Salmon. So Salmon married Rahab from Jericho, a Canaanite woman. And she became the great-great-great-grandmother of King David. Salmon begat Boaz. Boaz begat Obed. Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. Cool, right? Cool story. Cool beans. All right, let's come back to me. All right, so that's Ruth. Hopefully you're still here. Let's see here. Gary. Hey, Gary. Hot to trot subject matter this morning. I'm hooked. Barley is the main ingredient, brewed in gallons myself because he was afraid. Religious. It's funny, right? All right. So, like there's different, obviously, fears, fear of the Lord, fear of God, fear out of respect, out of reverence, all this kind of stuff. So, but it's interesting, right? Book of Ruth is awesome. It's a great, great book. And I don't know if you've heard it presented this way before. Obviously, we just went through it just kind of verse by verse or chapter by chapter. But there's lots going on, and hopefully I've given you enough insight into the book of Ruth to give you a little bit of a backstory, a little bit of the culture, a little bit of where they are with regards to the mindset of how kinsman redeemer works, all this kind of stuff. And when you think about it, and this is, maybe I could tie this with a nice little bow. Pray for me that I can unpack this. So you have the lineage of Jesus Christ in the book of Matthew. You have the lineage of Mary in the Gospel of Luke. So you got one lineage that goes all the way from Joseph all the way to Solomon, to King David. Then you have the lineage of Mary that goes all the way back to Nathan, whose father was David. So Mary's lineage goes all the way back to Nathan. Joseph's lineage goes all the way back to Solomon. Those are both David's sons from Bathsheba, which is kind of interesting, right? So if Israel was to do some switcheroni today and say, we don't honor Jesus Christ because his father was not the legitimate father, because they didn't have sexual intercourse to conceive a baby. Remember, the baby was conceived by the Holy Spirit, and that's how Mary got pregnant. If they were to switch and say, we don't recognize Joseph being the father, we only recognize the mother's lineage, well, she goes all the way back to King David as well. So it doesn't matter. You can go either way. And if you use the kinsman redeemer option, that perhaps there was no lineage after Mary to save her family lineage, Joseph could use the kinsman redeemer option, and basically she would be into the tribe of Judah anyway, regardless of how you want to spin it. Jesus Christ is legit on every level from a kinsman redeemer point of view, legal status, from the lineage of Mary all the way to Nathan, to King David, legal. If you want to use the male status, Joseph, from a legal entity, not blood, but entity, even though it is blood, goes all the way back to King David. So if we're talking about physical, that, hey, Jesus' father is from the lineage of David, and he's adopted, basically, in some ways, spiritually, whatever you want to say. It's what I'm trying to say, it's legal on every avenue. It's legal. Every way you try and slice it, it is legal what Jesus Christ did. This is why he was birthed as a human being on earth. Goes all the way back to King David fulfilling that promise. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. And without Bathsheba, no Jesus. It's interesting, right? Any questions? Anything that jumps out at you? Something that maybe you never thought of before? I know we get sometimes hung up on the lineage from the perspective that Israel never, ever married people outside of Israel. And that's not true. You could see that they basically branched out to other nations as well continuously. Like if you go to Judges, look at this. Have a look at this. Let's go to Judges. I want to say Judges 3, but I'm not sure. Let's see. Is this here? Let me just see. Yeah, so Judges chapter 3. Let's go here real quick. Let's have a quick little gander, shall we? Now these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel by them, even as many of Israel had not known all the wars of Canaan. So they didn't understand anything about the Iron Age yet. Only that the generations of the children of Israel might know, to teach them war. At the least, as such as before knew nothing thereof. So mainly for those that had no experience with war, God was using these nations to teach them about war. And then namely, they didn't know anything about how the Philistines conducted warfare, and all the Canaanites and the Sidonians and the Hivites that dwelt in Mount Lebanon. I can't remember, but for some reason, Hittite. Oh, it's a Hittite. I think, what's his name? Uriah, the Hittite. I don't think he was a Hivite. He was a Hittite. Anyways, that dwelt in Mount Lebanon from Mount Baal Hermon. So 2 areas. So this is the region Hermon, and then this would be the town, onto the entering of Hamath. And they were to prove Israel by them, to know whether they would hearken unto the commandments of God, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses, more specifically in Deuteronomy. And the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites. So here we get Hittites, which is where Uriah came from, which is where most likely Bathsheba could have been from here. We're not sure, but she could have been a Hittite. Why? Because Uriah the Hittite was married to Bathsheba before King David knew her. So the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, Hittites, and Amorites, and Perizzites, and Hivites, and Jebusites. These are the ones that actually occupied Jerusalem. And they took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons, and served their gods. Interesting. So they took their daughters, who? The daughters of the Canaanites, daughters of the Hittites, daughters of the Amorites, daughters of the Perizzites, daughters of the Hivites, daughters of the Jebusites to be their wives, and gave their daughters of the Israelites to the sons of the Canaanites, the sons of the Hittites, the sons of the Amorites, the sons of the Pittites, the sons of the Hivites, and the sons of the Jebusites, mixed in Israel, and they worshipped other gods in Israel. This is in the book of Judges. I'm not making anything up. All right. Cool. Make a sense so far? Interesting, right? Yeah, it is like a biblical soap opera. Crazy, right? How mixed Israel is when you go all the way back to Egypt, and then even when you talk about the Ishmaelites, like they're mixed. Now, it's not so surprising that today we have Israel living back in their homeland since 1947, with some help probably from some of their brethren, if you will. Israel doesn't know who they are today. Why? Because they're from the 10 northern tribes mostly. Joseph doesn't know who he is, but God knows who he is, and there's a blindness in part right now over Israel, because the blindness is not just not knowing Jesus Christ, but the blindness is also they don't know who they are. And one day that veil is going to be lifted. When the rapture happens, when we're out of here, the restrainer is going to remove us, and now the Antichrist is going to be revealed, and that's when Israel is going to know we were following the wrong Messiah. This Messiah is secular in nature. It's interesting, right? So, yeah, I had to leave the world Uriah to marry Jesus. Kill the world, David. Yeah, you guys, you're going deep on me there, Scott. It's interesting that I strongly believe Israel's supposed to be there right now. I strongly believe we should be praying for Israel, but not in the context that maybe you normally would pray, because you pray out of not understanding. But I'm praying that Israel would know who they are. I don't think they fully grasp who they are. They may understand the land that they're in, but I would venture a guess that most do not fully appreciate why they're in that land today, that God brought them back to that land in 1947. And what's interesting is when you talk about the 6-Day War, I think it was in 1967, that people were like, well, that was miraculous, but there's lots of other things going on where I would almost say they had help as well, not just from God, but I'm saying that God orchestrated it, but they had help in interesting ways that were more, in some ways, secular in nature. What do I mean by that? Well, during the 6-Day War, Egypt got wind that Israel was about to attack them, but Israel wasn't going to attack them at all. It was a rumor. Where did the rumor came from? The rumor came from Russia. Russia gave Egypt a signal that Israel was going to attack them, but they weren't. Meanwhile, Israel was just doing some research on what was the name of F-18s, I want to say. I might be wrong in the type of ship. Let's just say F-18s. Basically, what they did, and this might be good for people that are pilots, basically, they paid $1 million to an Iraqi soldier to defect so that they could study this type of plane, because their planes weren't equivalent to these F-18 fighters. Like, these were top of the line fighter planes. So they paid an Iraqi $1 million and said, allow us to go up in this plane. You can defect. We'll pay you $1 million. You can disappear. We'll take care of you, but let us have access to the plane. So the pilots would fly in the air. They would figure out all the maneuvers that were weak. Why? So that when their Air Force attacks these type of fighter planes, they know the weakness. So the pilots would expose the weaknesses in these planes. Then when Egypt starts sending their tanks to the border, Israel sent alert, these guys are coming in to attack us. Meanwhile, Egypt thought Israel was going to attack them, but Israel was actually prepared for an attack. And so what they did is they used their planes to take out the airports first in Egypt. And when their fighter planes tried to take off, they already knew how to beat them. So they took over airspace over Egypt, took superiority, if you will, and then other nations tried to attack Israel, and they took out their airports as well. And within 6 days, they had superiority over the air, and they are allowed to go wherever they wanted. That's the 6 day. That's how the 6-Day War was able to unfold so easily, is because Israel did their research before the 6-Day War. I know that's a lot. Maybe that's another video, but maybe you're right. Maybe it was MiG-21s, not F-18s. MiG-21s. I think you're right. That's how that rings a bell. That they had, like, I think Iraq had MiG-21s as well, which I think go back to Russia. I think. I'm not a pilot. What do I know? The point is that they did their research to expose the MiG-21s, so that when their planes were flying, they knew how to defeat these planes, and they did it in like a matter of hours, which is interesting. So yeah, crazy, right? Yeah, so it's interesting that a lot of immigrants came from Europe, Russia to form Israel, and it's interesting that they call themselves Israel versus Judah. Again, this goes back to Joseph not knowing himself, and Ephraim and all this kind of stuff. So basically, if you ever look in the Old Testament, if you see Egypt or if you see Israel Ephraim, Joseph, it all is in reference to the 10 northern tribes. But that is it for today's video. Hopefully you got something out of this. Hopefully it makes sense. I tried to go deep on this book of Ruth, and now I'm going to be getting into 1st and 2nd Samuel. And again, there's lots going on in 1st and 2nd Samuel, and maybe I'll do a video on combining those two books together. Something that stands out to me, maybe we'll see. But I can go all day on the book of Ruth, but hopefully you got a snapshot of it. Because again, one of the things that I like to do is I like to go over a book over and over and over again. I can't tell you how many times I've read the book of Ruth. Doesn't take long. 15 minutes, you're done the book of Ruth. You can read that over and over again. It's awesome, right? Yeah, thank you. And I haven't come across this. Maybe I just haven't looked enough online or on the YouTube channel, but I usually see kind of the level 1 stuff where they just kind of say, it's kind of weird that Moab is here in Israel. It's kind of weird. I don't know how Israel can ever have a relationship with Moab. They're to be cursed, and they just kind of skip over stuff. And I don't know. I really like reading between the lines, reading the culture, understanding the culture a little bit, why things were done without religious biases, if you will, because we can do that a lot. We just put on our religious glasses and then we look at the Old Testament and we're like, oh man, I don't understand how anybody could swear, cuss, how any person could murder anyone. I don't understand that. I can't read it. I don't understand why Cain murdered Abel. Like, how could he do this thing? How can he do this? It's like you're missing the big picture that we are humans and we're flawed. And the Bible records those flaws. Thank God for that. Thank God there is flaws in understanding. And I think if you read it from the perspective that these people don't have 100% knowledge of everything, past, present, future, you can give them a little bit of a break. Because we understand a lot more than they did because we have the whole Bible. We have the whole Bible, and Paul tells us that we also have the Holy Spirit. And it's because of Paul that we have an understanding of the resurrection. We have an understanding that we're joint heirs in Christ. Paul brought to the forefront that Israel is partially blind right now. Nobody else thought about that. Nobody else thought the Gentiles could actually be joint heirs in Christ. Nobody else thought the idea that we could be grafted into Israel spiritually. Nobody. And you're not going to find it in the Old Testament. You're not, because it's more historical in nature. It doesn't teach us how to live our life as a Christian, how we have seats in heavenly places, how we're joint heirs in Christ, how we are alive for all of eternity. We don't get those teachings in the Old Testament. But therefore, our learning, for our understanding, our admonishment, all that kind of stuff, that's what the Old Testament is for. We can look at it and go, oh, this is how people made mistakes. This is how people were successful. Now we can piece those things together. Back to work now. All right. See you, JT. So hopefully that makes sense, because I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice by reading the Bible with a religious context, as in, I don't know how people can make mistakes. I don't get it. And yet, so what we'll do then is we'll skip over books because we don't like it. There's battles, there's hard times, there's famine, and we're like, oh, this is horrible. So we just skip, and then we stick around in the New Testament, not understanding the big picture that we've all made mistakes, all of us. So we shouldn't look at other people like it's a shocker when somebody falls down, skins their knee, and we don't point a finger and go, how can you fall? I don't understand that, how you can fall down. You call yourself a Christian. Or you read from 1st, 2nd Samuel, and you see David lust after Bathsheba. Oh, how could he ever do that? If I was a king back then, I would never do that. Like, we're weird when it comes to scripture. We are. We're just like, we look at it like, and we look at our neighbor, disgusting. These people are disgusting. We're perfect. That's how we look at things. That's how we look at life. And it's weird. I'm telling you, it's weird. Anyways, I think that will be it for today's video. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. It's Victoria Day here in Canada. That's it. If there's another topic that you would like me to dive into, specifically when we get into the book of Samuel, let me know that as well in the comments. And feel free to check out my community tab on this channel, because every once in a while I'll put little insights. I'll put little polls in there of ideas of videos that I'm thinking about. Just check that out once in a while, and you can actually be a part of the poll and say, yeah, you know what? I like this book. I like this topic versus that topic, or that kind of stuff. It just helps me to gauge my audience a little bit better as we move along as well. So thanks again. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Feel free to leave a comment. Give me a thumbs up. Your comments are always appreciative. So thanks again, and I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.